The 120 is the biggest Nordhavn to date, and it's a project that we started back in 2008. We went through approaching 2 years of tooling production and then the actual construction of the boat, which took until late spring, early summer of this year.
Neat things about the 120 layout is that we decided to put the engine amidships, which allowed us to separate the guest accommodations. Instead of having all the accommodations forward where you had one central staircase, which can tend to get a little congested at times, we were able to separate the two guest areas and have two separate staircases down to them, which created a real nice privacy situation.
This boat has a full load displacement of almost 900,000 pounds, or actually maybe a little over 900,000 pounds. And even in its empty weight is so big and heavy that it was very, very difficult to arrange for any kind of shipping. It was possible, but the cost was prohibitive. So from fairly early on, we had made a decision to bring the boat back on its own bottom from Xiamen, China to Vancouver via Hong Kong. Finally, in April, we were able to actually get the boat out of the factory and launch it using the boatyard facilities, the travel lift and so forth. And the boat went through a period of testing in the local waters. The systems, the final survey, sea trials that involve the American Bureau of Shipping folks. And there was about 2 months of intensive testing and startup of all the systems on the boat. So as I mentioned, we had done extensive testing there at the yard prior to our departure with the surveyors from the American Bureau of Shipping. We did high-speed runs, turns, crash stops, running from full speed forward into full speed reverse. We ran the boat at full throttle in reverse and put the boat through some extensive testing, so we were pretty confident we had a good solid boat. as we were getting ready to leave, we had an issue with a typhoon that was approaching Xiamen, and it was a named typhoon by the name of Solik, and it was bearing right directly down on Xiamen, and we weren't sure how bad it was going to get. Some projections were showing 70, 80 mile an hour winds. But by the time it got to us, it had kind of fizzled out, and we really got nothing more than maybe 30, 40 knots of wind and some real heavy torrential rain.
It was nice to finally clear Xiamen Harbor and get out into the open ocean and the Straits of Taiwan. We really got a feel for the boat and bigger swells, and even though there wasn't much weather, we could get a nice feel for how the stabilizers were going to work and the noise levels in the boat and so forth.
The trip from Xiamen down to Hong Kong was less than 400 miles, and it was a nice, easy trip. We had very good weather conditions. We did have another typhoon that was kind of coming our direction. It was a named storm again called Cimarron, but it was farther to seaward, and we really weren't too concerned about it. But we had wonderful weather, came into Hong Kong in the morning, decided to go right through the middle of Victoria Harbor with Hong Kong on one side and Kowloon on the other, and we proceeded on in to the marina that we were planning on visiting, which was the Gold Coast Marina, and we were able to come in there mid-afternoon, take a slip and position our boat amongst numerous other mega yachts that were cruising in the area. Part of what we were doing in Hong Kong was additional provisioning for the 14 people that would be aboard for this long trip.
Till I come tomorrow morning, like I'll be.
And we also had to take on fuel, and we had to take on about 16,000 gallons of diesel fuel, which was done by a lighter or a powered barge. And we met this barge outside of the Gold Coast Marina. We had to run on out into the inner harbor and raft up alongside this this barge, and we took on the fuel. Took it on for the first time. That's always a bit nerve-wracking, but taking on fuel at 200 gallons per minute, we were able to complete the fueling process in just a couple of hours. So we were completely full of fuel, completed that phase and ran the boat back into Gold Coast for the final provisioning and to wait for our departure clearance.
Got a long ways to go, Doug.
Once we finally got underway from Hong Kong to Vancouver, it was nice to see the boat settle down. Everybody kind of got into their routines of watch standing, and sleeping schedules were good. So yeah, it was great. Finally get underway on a real passage.
We got a good weather forecast from our weather forecaster, Omni Navigation, Bob Jones, and decided to run up the western coast of Taiwan, so staying on the inside of Taiwan. And that area is very, very shallow, a lot of fishing boat traffic, very small boats with a minimal radar return. So it was a little stressful running up through there, and finally came around the northwest side of Taiwan and turned out a little bit more to the northeast. and actually passed by the disputed islands, the islands that China has kind of laid claim to, and Japan is in disagreement. That's the Senkaku Islands, and that was quite interesting to pass by those islands and take a look at them. Really beautiful weather, beautiful sunsets. It was still very, very warm, and we were proceeding north at a good clip, 9.5, 10 knots. The first few days were a very, very nice ride. And after passing the Senkaku Islands, we had a fairly good stretch, with the next major point of interest being the island of Okinawa. We approached Okinawa fairly early in the morning and ran up its east coast, and everybody was kind of in awe of what had gone on there in World War II. It was interesting to get that close. We got a pretty good view of the eastern coast of the island where all the fighting took place during World War II. We had anticipated some pretty good fishing while we were in the tropical phase of our trip. As we headed north, we had warm water and tropical conditions. So we had brought along some trolling rigs, which we set, and sure enough, we were able to catch a number of medium, small Dorado.
Maybe I have a flat nose.
Alrighty, we're back here in the galley. We're getting Matilda all breaded up and ready to fry. Got some sunflower seed oil on. Well, 350-ish, 355, maybe 370. Anywhere in there is gonna work well. Get a nice golden brown crust on it. On the commercial break, we made some nice homemade flour tortillas. And yeah, let's do her up, straight and proper. Real nice shallow little fry here.
We were lucky to have Derek along as our head chef. He really proved to be a real asset, not only in provisioning the boat, but the meals that he cooked. He was always up at night preparing snacks, and he made the best fish tacos we ever had.
With the weather systems that were off to our east, we were forced to run farther north than what we had anticipated, and really ended up going all the way up to Adak, which is the westernmost of the Aleutian Islands, before we could make more of a pronounced westerly turn. And at that point, our latitude was fairly high, and we'd been lucky up until then. The only weather we had had maybe was in the neighborhood of 25 knots, 30 knots, which on that big boat really doesn't have much effect on it. But as we turned to go more to the west, running around Adak, we started to see some more serious weather that was pushing its way kind of to the north. Going up the northern side of the Aleutian Islands, this system continued to develop, get more and more complex, and we pretty much knew we're not gonna be able to avoid it. We saw clear that we were gonna get 50 knots of wind with seas in the 20-25 foot range, and there wasn't really much we could do except stay fairly close to the northern portion of the islands because the weather really was coming from the southeast. So the ride wasn't too bad until we got up around Adak, and it progressively got worse and worse. Felt the best thing to do would be to make a turn and go actually into the port of Adak, into Sweeper Cove, and seek refuge. We had been running for 21 days, and we all felt like we kind of needed to shut things down, give the systems a thorough once over, take a little bit of a breather, and I think it was a really good call to pull into Adak there. The conditions calmed down very nicely. Actually, even the wind abated quite a bit. We were able to launch one of the tenders, and some of us went ashore. We had a restful night on board, and then the next day we were able to do a little bit of sightseeing.
Adak was a real interesting place. We didn't really know what to expect, but all of the mountains and the areas we were anchored in was just as green as could be. It felt like you were maybe in Scotland or Ireland or something.
I ended up meeting the harbor master, Elena, who was just a sweetheart of a lady. Was very, very helpful and real gracious. We actually had Elena along with a couple of her friends on board the boat that night, the second night that we were there for dinner, and that was a real treat for us all. And a lot of fun, and we took them all back ashore. But it was a neat place. I'd love to go back there. Very, very interesting, all the history there and the things that happened during World War II and during the Cold War. An amazing place, Adak. The engines used in the 120 are the MTU 2000, which are 1,000 horsepower apiece, and that's a continuous duty rating. And coming across this long trip, we were running these engines consuming only about 200 horsepower per side. So at that low power setting, the MTU recommended that we run the engines hard for about a half an hour per 24 hours, which we did. We'd run them right up to the continuous duty rating, which would take our speed from about 9.5, 10 knots, which we were cruising at, up to about 14 knots. And it was always something that everybody kind of enjoyed to watch, as you know, the 2,000 horsepower being put in the water with about a 90 gallon per hour consumption. It created a big, powerful boiling wake, and it was something that everybody kind of looked forward to and watched on a daily basis. We arrived in Dutch Harbor very early in the morning and were instructed to rendezvous with a pilot boat and take on a pilot, which it was mandatory we have a pilot aboard, being a foreign flag vessel coming into Alaskan waters, which we did. We picked up the pilot and he directed us to a berth, a dock. We were able to tie up at, and that was where we took on fuel, and we were able to get on and off the boat and do some additional provisioning and so forth there. Dutch Harbor was a treat for all of us. We'd all, spent years watching The Deadliest Catch and kind of familiar with Dutch Harbor. It's a famous place, huge fishing port. And so it was neat for us to be there. We rented a truck and were able to take on some additional provisions and drive around, kind of look at the area. And we had a lot of the commercial fishermen actually approach and ask about the boat. And we gave some tours, had some people aboard, and met some very, very interesting fishermen.
Right.
Well,
You're going to shoot over to Wrangell Narrows. You need
That's
to
what
go.
everybody's telling us to do right now. Well, we
Okay.
can't go through Wrangell Narrows. We need a pilot of this big boat to go through.
Do
the
you?
foreign flag, yeah, so
No,
it's-
there's
Going-
I've
yeah.
gone
You
through
went
it
right at
backwards, man. I've had my life suit on, and I can see the lights of town.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm serious.
Sometimes
Backwards,
a freighter will be
13
going
knots
through and
backwards.
just- yeah.
And I wake up and the skipper's going, "We got to turn around." I'm looking at him like, "You stupid."
Stand-up guys were these Russian guys we met. We had them on board for a couple drinks, and the next thing you know, they were bringing us a fish called a black cod, which none of us had ever had before, and it was awesome fish. And we had some crab from some other fishermen. Dutch Harbor was a real great experience.
Yeah, I'm gonna need like 4 knots would be good.
Roger, 4 knots.
We finally got our clearance to depart Dutch Harbor. We had taken on about 5,000 gallons of fuel just to make sure we had plenty to get on into Vancouver. And we departed and had just a beautiful, beautiful passage up the southern coast of Unimak and Unalaska Islands. And we had it was bright sunshine. There was, you could see the glaciers. The birds were feeding, lots of sea life, and it was just a beautiful, crisp, clear day. We were on our way to Vancouver. We're excited. This was the last leg of our trip. Been a long haul, and we were getting close and excited about this last leg. We had talked a lot to the fishermen that were aboard about the conditions going across the Gulf of Alaska. I was not sure whether or not we were going to veer off to the right and go south and go down the west coast of Vancouver Island, which would have been the quickest, or if the weather dictated it, we could run inside. There was a fairly substantial low and a storm system that was coming up from the south, so it was pretty clear that it was a good decision to go into the Dixon entrance and run inside. That was going to be a real treat to run down that, so I was quite happy with the way things turned out there. Yeah, upon entering the Dixon entrance, we proceeded on into the proper inside passage, running down the Grenville Channel, and it's really spectacular scenery. You're running down a fairly narrow channel with beautiful mountains. The scenery. We ran down to Grenville Channel. We arrived in the morning, coming in the Dixon entrance. Ran all that day. Ran through the night.
Run them up, and then you can hold us, and we just run down the side and really clean it up a lot.
Yeah, the last morning we woke up there at Hansen Island. We decided to give the boat a little bit of a scrub down and clean her up for the final leg into Vancouver.
Put me about right here, Dave.
And we wanted to launch the dinghy and do some cleanup on the boat, try to get some photographs and so forth. So we ended up spending the night there at Hansen Island at anchor, rested up, did a good cleanup on the boat, and got underway early in the morning for our final push on down into Vancouver. We came in under the Lionsgate Bridge in Vancouver. It was a very early morning. We actually had to slow down a little bit, wait for the sun to come up a bit. It was drizzly and rainy and cold. And we ran through the Lionsgate Bridge and into the inner harbor of Vancouver to the customs dock. Called the customs and they came down. The Conconis showed up, and it was kind of a well reunited, and that marked the end of a trip. We had over 6,000 miles on the trip meter, and basically had a phenomenal trip. Something I'll never forget. The final little leg was to run the boat from Vancouver on up to Port Moody, and the Conconis, were aboard and actually brought their son aboard, and it was a great, day to run that boat up to Port Moody. The last challenge that we faced was to lower the hydraulically actuated mast, and the radar and electronics antennas would come down hydraulically, and we raised the door to the Conconi's boathouse, and we were able to run the boat, 120-foot boat, within this beautiful boathouse that was kind of designed to accommodate it. Okay, this trip was kind of the conclusion or the end of the first phase of 5.5 years of work on this project. And Jeff and I both wanted to be on board the boat and participate in the delivery, and it was fantastic to be in control of that boat, to experience it, see its capability, feel the way that it operated, and really immerse ourselves into the operation of the boat. We've always done that with boats we built in the past, and it was a terrific learning experience, always has been.
Yeah, the decision to go on the trip, I think, was a good one. Both Jim and I agreed that it was important for us to be on the boat. We learned a lot, to be on a boat for 6 weeks or whatever it was we were on. You just learn so much more than you do on a normal little sea trial or even overnight trips.
6 weeks of intensive involvement with that boat running across the Pacific was a wonderful experience. We learned an awful lot, and very happy with the way that it all turned out. Look forward to building, launching, and bringing back the next one.